And what we discussed so far is how we can model requirements, especially when you want to develop an information system. Information gathering is very, very important. So today we start with looking at data and process modeling, which is another type of modeling technique. So this data and process modeling technique is very popular in a structured analysis approach, which means like software development lifecycle technique, where you have a flow of different phases, right? So in here, we are going to look at, or we can describe information system using data and processes, right? So we'll start with the data and process modeling first. And similar method we can use for object modeling is if you're going to use object orientation here, right? So let's start with that. Okay, to start with, we'll try to first understand what happens in the data and process modeling. As the name says, we are going to represent data and the processes. Simply, we know that within the information system, we transform our data into useful information. So data and process modeling will be created what we call logical model, which will supports our business operations. Right. So I hope you remember the idea of these logical and physical models. So under the logical models, we simply try to represent what the system must do. And we are not going to focus on any implementation. And then the next one will be the implementation part. And that is known as physical model, right? So under the physical model, we can describe how system will be constructed. So under this one, we are going to discuss 3 different tools. We'll start with the data flow diagram. Then we are going to talk about data dictionary. And then we are going to talk about process descriptions. Okay, let's start with the first one, data flow diagrams. So in data flow diagrams, we are going to use different graphical symbols. And using these graphical symbols, we can show how system transform the data into useful information. And then we will create a set of data flow diagrams with different levels. So the initial level, we are trying to represent the very high level overview of the model. And then we can go into deep in detail information. Right. First, let's start with understanding the symbols. There are many different symbols people use to represent the same thing. In the book that we are using, we are going to use to represent the main 4 entities, that is processors, data flows, data stores, and external entities. So the processors like our information system as well as the sub-processors inside this will represent in a rectangle box like this. With the inside, we write down the process name. Then we will use arrows to represent where the data flows. And then on top of that, we can write down what the data that will flow from one point to the other point. The places where we store the data, we call data stores, will represent in this way, where, for example, this one represents the student database. And the external parties will represent in a square like this. Right. So having said that, now let's see some guidelines when you're drawing data flow diagrams. I told you in the beginning, we are going to create a set of data flow diagrams. The first diagram is called context diagrams. When you say context diagram, usually we draw into one page. It will be a one-page document. And we are going to represent our whole information system as our main process. For example, let's say we are going to create a information system for grading. We call grading system. So you will have only a single process, right? And then I told you, you can draw several diagrams. In lower level diagrams, we can have more processes. For example, grading system, we can divide it into 3 sub-processes. For example, establish grade book, assign final grade, and produce grade report. So when you're representing, we have to use unique names, and then we will use a numbering system. For example, I told you we will have several levels. The first level, the very first one, we call it as a context diagram. So we represent context diagram with number 0. And when you go down with the detailed version, we will have numbers as 1, 2, 3, and so on. If you go down, for example, let's say a detailed version of 1, then you can go as 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and so on. Now that we have understand about the guidelines, let's start with drawing the context diagram. I told you in the beginning, it will be the top level view. So therefore, you start by drawing the information system in the middle. We represent it as a single process in the center of the page. And we put 0. Remember, this also we discussed. Then around this process or the information system, we put the system entities, right? And then we draw the lines to indicate our data flows. Make a note that we don't have data stores at this level, right? So that will be not included. So very important thing to know. Let me give you an example. Let's say we have a grading system. So since this is about the grading system, we are going to make a rectangle shape and we put 0 to indicate that this is the context. And then we will write a unique name. We say grading system. That's the first point. Now we know that information system is used by many. And here are the possible entities who can use the grading system. So you can see here there are 2 entities, especially student and instructor is going to use this system. And this is another system. So it's called student record system, where usually our student information we keep in a separate system. And this is about the grades. So the grading system is different. So this is also we note as an external entity. Last one, we draw data flows. Now you can see that these arrows, right? will come into the process, the information system, and go out from the system. For example, a student can submit work for grading, right? And then the graded work can be sent to the students through the grading system. So likewise, the system that we will have here can take up, we can take class roster from this system, and the final grades of the module that we are grading can be put into the records. And here, when you're representing data flows, remember you should use nouns. Here we will say, okay, we will get the final grade. And here we will get the class roster. And here we are sending graded work. We are getting in submitted work. So then we have instructor is the one who giving grading parameters, and then you will get a grade report. Let's look at another example. In this example, we are going to represent order system, where users can enter orders and apply payments, right? So having said that, we know that since it is the system, we put it in the middle of the page, we say order system, and we put 0 there. And then we can list out all the external entities. You can see there are several here. We have customers, sales reps, bank, accounting, and even we have a warehouse. And as I discussed earlier, we have only 3 objects here. This is the process, these are entities, and these are the data flows. So what happens here, when user wants to order something, the customer will place the order that will come inside the order system, right? And then the system will connect to the warehouse by sending the picking list and see whether you have that set of equipments. So if the items are available, then we can actually inform the customer that, okay, we have stocks. And then at the same time, you put the invoice, customer can pay. So now the warehouse can complete the order, right? Which will be sent to the customer. Then sales rep get a commission, bank get a bank deposit, accounting will receive cash. Right, let's move on to the step number 2. In step number 2, we are going to go into detail, which means in previously we have a single process. We want to go into more information. So here we will discuss drawing a diagram we call 0 DFD. So in this one, when you want to represent more information about the context diagram, we can use a deeper level of the diagram. And in this particular case, it will represent what we call the internal processes, data flows, and data stores. Right. One thing you need to remember when you go into details, your input and output won't change. Now, let's say we have a process called F. Let's say your input is A, output is B. But within this process, you can find several more subsets. But still, again, input is A, the output is B. Now things have changed, right? So sometimes one single phase, we can elaborate more on this when you have a situation like this. Right. So let's look at more detailed version of the context diagram. I told you in the middle, we have the process for the system and we named as 0. And you can see that external entities. One place to be careful about this student record system. Right. So that's about the grading system. Right. Now, when you draw the low-level diagrams, there are two ways we can create the lower levels. So in looking at the lower level diagrams, we can use two techniques to explore. We use two terms, leveling and exploding. So if you look at leveling, you are going to process incrementally detailed diagrams. Then second one we call balancing. So in balancing, what it should do is it should evaluate input and output and you align properly. Right. Here is the order system. We are improve the very first one. That means we are going to improve in our case. Right. Okay. Small exercise you try. I want you to draw a diagram 0 DFT which represent the information system. What I expect you to do is, right, all these were given to you. I want to come up with something where we have a system for a information system. So there are no single answers for the question like this. It's an open-ended one. First one, identify the processes and then identify the entities. So how do you start? The first one is a context diagram. What are the other entities that you can think of in a library information system? Okay, good. We can have subscribers. Yes. I want you to draw a diagram like this. So let's start with the context diagram. I need something like this. Can you take a screenshot of this? Then let's elaborate this very same idea to other. Right. Okay. So I want you to draw the context diagram first. Okay, shall we start? Maybe I can put you in groups. Let me post. As a group, what I want you to try is come up with the context diagram first for a information system for library. So when you are drawing context diagram, let me reiterate what you need to understand. The first one, in the middle of the page, you are going to have the information system. In this particular case, it should be the library system, right? So you can say it's a library information system. And then you need to identify the systems or other entities who interact with. So for example, you can have users, the library staff, and so on, right? So those are the what we call the entities. And then these arrows can be used to say what data you are transferring from each, for example, library user to the library information system. So when you are writing down, this should be some data, not any verbs here. So for example, here, customer places an order. So that's what we have written here. It's just the order. So for example, if the user is requesting a book list, so here you have to write a book list, for example. Right. So that's a simple exercise for you to give. I will give you 1 week for working on that. So as a group that you have formed, I want you to submit it in the LMS. I will put up a link as the assignment. It's okay. There's a question with the level 0. Okay, but this 0 is to say the context diagram. What do you mean by context diagram? Means the 0 represents the whole information system. Hope I have answered your question. 85. Okay, thank you. So when you go down in information, for example, library information system, so there could be processes like adding users, adding books, likewise, you can go down in one level more detailed processes, then you name it as 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, if you want to go down, let's say in 2, for example, you can have it as 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and so on. So simply this data flow diagram show you what data and also in entities and data flows among them. And in the first diagram, the context diagram, we don't have any data storages. But from the deeper level, then you can have, databases. So that's how you should, go for it. So have a look at this and try to come up with an answer for a library information system. We will have another discussion class based on your submissions. Thank you.